Hello, hello. Don't know if you can hear me yet. Let's see. Hi, Avro. Hi, Dolores. I'll be with you in a minute. Got to do a bit of sharing here. Hi, Evelina. Hi, Kay. Nice to see you all. Still doing a bit of sharing. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you again. It's good to see you again. I hope you had a really good day. Evelina, Dolores, Carmen, thanks for coming. Kay, Steve Wolfbrand, really great to see you. And the NC refused Medicare for all on the platform today. That was stupid. Really stupid. 88% of the voters in the party want Medicare for all, and they won't put it in the platform. If they set out to prove that we are no longer a democracy, they couldn't have done a better job. Rashid Mohammed says, love your last video. Well, thank you, Rashid. And Steve Wolfbrand says, hi, Kay. Steve says, sharing to the groups. Hi, Russ. Russ Goldman is here, says, I got a strange background noise. I'll double check, see if I still have it. Don't know where the strange background noise would be coming from. Ah, there it is. It slips out of my Samsung mic for some reason and slips into the mode of system sound. I now am using my Samsung Meteor mic, however, so you shouldn't be hearing it anymore, hopefully. I'm going to double check one more thing before I get started completely, and that is, oh yeah, I see why. Keeps reverting to the default microphone, and I don't want it to do that. So I think I've adjusted it now, so it will not do that anymore. Kay says sound is fine for me. Steve says background noise again, Doc. Carmen says trying to catch enough signal to share. How's it going now, everybody? Strange noise is still there. Yeah, it shifted over again. Russ says, now you are better. Okay, thank you, Russ. I think I hopefully have stopped the shifting. If you hear the strange noise again, please let me know. Carmen says no more background noise. Okay, great. So we're ready to start. Now the title is Reaction to the Republican Senate Proposal. The terrible Senate proposal. It's now fully out there. It's official. We know what it is. Let's start with the treatment that was given to the proposal by Dave Dayen at the American Prospect. He always has good things to say, Dave does. July 28th, 2020, the unsanitized column. The HEALS Act emerges. There's a picture of Mitch. Holds in his hand information about a fairly terrible piece of legislation called the HEALS Act, says Dave. It should have been HEELS, the HEALS Act. A $1 trillion piece of legislation so comically in hock to corporate interests that one of the initials in the acronym stands for liability protection, quote unquote. And that was released, of course, just yesterday. Dave says this was done in a super annoying format where separate committee chairs release their own titles, finance, appropriation, small business, but you can mostly piece everything together. Here's what we've got. Unemployment. Increased unemployment insurance immediately falls from $600 a week to $200 a week. This extension runs till the end of the year. So, everybody, you can be guaranteed until the end of the year to lose $400 per week. How many weeks until the end of the year? That's how much they're taking away from you compared to what you have been getting. $400 a week. August, September, October, November, and December. How many weeks is that? 22 weeks? 22 weeks times $400 a week. How much is that? Is it $800 that they're taking away from you that you otherwise would have had under the old system? That doesn't count how much you're going to lose because of the interruption, because there's no agreement yet, because they wouldn't simply take the HEROES Act, as gross as it was. If they had just taken the HEROES Act and gone with that, you'd be $8,800 richer than they're proposing. So they're proposing to take $8,800 away from you if you are unemployed. That's a lot of money. Are you going to vote for people who are taking $8,800 away from you? I don't think so. Combined with what the states offer, that's on average a cut from $921 a week to $521 a week, around 43%. So they cut you back to 43% of what you've been getting, according to an analysis from the Century Foundation. Well, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about that? Does it feel good? You're going to vote for those people? You're going to support them in their effort to pass this act? I don't think so. Okay. Allegedly, after 2 months, states will figure out how to individually replace 70% of lost wages and offers that with a cap of $500 from the government in that equation. The cap means that everyone will have a lower support from unemployment under this plan. Dave puts a period there, but I would say than people have been getting. He then says, I highly doubt that states will figure this out, given the technical hurdles and the underfunded systems, which do get a $2 billion boost here. And in that instance, they just stick with the $200 week addition. Also, everyone gets a note saying they're required to take a suitable job if offered. What does that mean? First reaction. Also, the federal stipend counts as income for purposes of determining eligibility for other federal benefits. So they may be taking other federal benefits away from you in return for this $8,800 cut they're going to give you. This only affects those on standard unemployment, however, not the gig workers and freelancers on pandemic unemployment assistance, the PUA. That was already extended to the end of the year in the CARES Act. Now, if they extended that to the end of the year in the CARES Act, why didn't they extend unemployment insurance for other people to the end of the year in the CARES Act? What's wrong with Nancy Pelosi? She didn't insist on that. However, the HEALS Act tightens eligibility to make it as hard to stay on assistance as possible. Dave says, and I completely agree. The whole thing is appalling. Second stimulus. This is pretty much exactly the same as the CARES Act, with $1,200 for adults and $500 for dependents, not just children, in a switch from CARES. Up to $75,000 in personal income based on last year. And then a sliding scale that phases out completely under $100,000. Of course, last year was far better than this year. So this is the year you're having the problem. This is the year you maybe are not going to make the $75,000, which maybe you made last year. If so, you've got a problem because they're not considering what's going on this year. And then a sliding scale that phases out completely under 100,000. One cheerful note: the rebates are protected from bank garnishment or levy by private creditors or debt collectors. This is something near and dear to us at Unsanitized, as we broke the news that creditors, including banks, could grab stimulus checks to offset old debts. It's gratifying that Congress is finally getting around to making sure survival money goes to survival. How wonderful. Business tax credits. The employee retention tax credit sounds boring, but this is a pretty large bonus for businesses that could cost as much as $100 billion. It was in the CARES Act, but this provision allows for more companies to use it. There's also a tax credit for hiring unemployed workers and a safe and healthy workplace tax credit for expenses like testing, PPE, and cleaning supplies. This is Lysol's big moment. Move over, Amazon. Healthcare. There's $118 billion in new money for hospitals, testing, contact tracing, treatment, and vaccines. The Medicare Part B premium for 2021 would be frozen. So I presume that means it couldn't go up, but also would not go down, right? Telehealth waivers would be extended to facilitate contactless forms of medical care. There's a bunch of what seems like for show assistance to nursing homes, including, quote, strike teams, unquote, and better reporting. A good health rundown here, and there's a link to that. Okay, it's a Politico article on the aid that's going to the healthcare sector of the economy. Schools, as previously noted, there's $105 billion for education split between K-12 and higher ed, with a substantial portion of it only for those schools that reopen in the fall. However, amazingly, that's all the money there is for state and local government, and I gather all of it covers increased costs for social distancing measures. $150 billion previously released in the CARES Act, which previously was only for increased COVID costs, can now go toward covering revenue shortfalls with many restrictions. But that's not new money. The House Democratic Heroes Act had nearly $1 trillion for state and local government. Random appropriations, there's $20 billion for farmers, $29 billion for defense, a slush fund for defense contractors in the F-35, a $1.8 billion earmark for new FBI headquarters that just so happens to be near a Trump hotel, $10 billion for a very sketchy airport improvement program. I think they're just paying off airports to stay open, and about $3 billion for tenant rental assistance, a drop in the ocean of what will be needed. There's also $5.3 billion more to use the Defense Production Act to require certain kinds of manufacturing. Coupons. Expensing of restaurant business meals goes up from 50% to 100% because you want to be doing business in the middle of a restaurant during the pandemic. Right. Small business grants. There's a second draw, PPP loan enabled for smaller businesses under 300 employees with a 50% drop or more in revenue during the crisis. There's also new recovery sector 20-year loans at a 1% interest rate, also for hard-hit industries. Section 113 of this title makes 501c6 organizations eligible for regular PPP loans. This is the K Street bailout, the lobbyist bailout. That's also in the House bill. The math is weird, but it looks like $157 billion in new money on top of the remaining $120 billion plus. There's already massive lobbying over these plans to pry them open for bigger businesses. But liability protection, this has been well documented. It's a 5-year blanket release from a flood of business liability lawsuits that don't exist. But Mitch said there's 3,500 such lawsuits. Did he say 100 or 1,000? That already exist. I'm afraid Dave doesn't see them, doesn't see where they are. Maybe Mitch has other information, or maybe 35,000 or 3,500 or whatever the number is, isn't a flood compared to the normal number of business liability lawsuits that we see this time of the year. Student loans. After the deferral deadline in the CARES Act runs out on October 1st, you can only defer student loan payments if you have no income. Otherwise, there's a 10% income-based repayment option. The Trust Act, we reported last week that a Mitt Romney-created process to inevitably cut Social Security and Medicare would be in the bill. It is. Here's what's missing. There's no extension of the eviction moratorium. Even though Larry Kudlow, the advisor to the president, said there would be an extension, there's no such extension. No money for the Postal Service or the November elections. No hazard pay for essential workers. No OSHA standards for workplaces. No money to shore up pensions. No funds for people who lost employer-sponsored health insurance, and there may be 30 million of those. No increase to food stamp benefits, and none of the $1 trillion in new money for state and local government. So that's the indictment in this list of here's what's missing. No extension of the eviction moratorium. No money for the Postal Service or the November elections. No hazard pay for essential workers. No OSHA standards for workplaces. No money to shore up pensions. No funds for people who lost employer-sponsored health insurance. No increase to food stamps, and none of the $1 trillion in new money for state and local government. So, one measure of Nancy Pelosi's coming success or lack of success in relation to this bill is how much of this stuff she can get back, that the House Democrats can get back, that the Democrats in general can get back, the Senate Democrats too. What can they get back? It's in some ways a waste to lay this out, as now we move to the negotiating stage. But all of the above being off the table frames the corners of the debate. Nearly the entire framework of the HEROES Act was thrown out. Democrats have some leverage because rank and file Republicans really don't want to pass this bill at all. But what will they be able to claw back as a result? The question is directed towards the Democrats, of course. Doesn't that put the CARES Act in a different context, as whatever emerges is likely to be very inadequate? One final indignity, the Republican baseline may include, but it's completely unclear, the repeal of leverage requirements for banks put in place under the Dodd-Frank Act. This is a straight handout to Wall Street. What's notable here is that this was the signature contribution to Dodd-Frank from endangered incumbent Susan Collins, who I've been told argued against this but was rebuffed. There's no way McConnell does this if Collins had a chance of winning. You don't strip a senator's biggest policy achievement of the last decade in the middle of a tight election if you think she's going to win. The signal I get is that Senator McConnell knows he's beat, and the strategy for the next 6 months is just to steal whatever's not bolted down on behalf of corporate America. It's only 5 months, Dave. We're almost at the end of July. So that August, September, October, November, December. In January, there's a new Senate and a new Congress. And if he's beat, he's not going to be the majority leader. So the strategy for the next 5 months is just to steal whatever is not bolted down on behalf of corporate America. So that's Dave's take on this. Let's go on to fill in some other reactions. But that reaction is a very, very important one, I think. Let's go on to look at some other reactions. Common Dreams. Jake Johnson has an article, quote, utter disgrace, unquote. GOP proposes legal immunity for corporations, zero in funding for states, and deep cuts to unemployment benefits. With joblessness at historic levels, millions of Americans struggling to afford food, states and localities barreling towards fiscal disaster, and the U.S. Postal Service on the verge of collapse, Senate Republicans on Monday unveiled the COVID-19 stimulus proposal that would slash unemployment benefits, do nothing to expand federal nutrition aid, provide zero in new funding for states, and leave the United States Postal Service without any additional emergency relief. While giving short shrift to workers, the Republican package would ensure corporations are not held accountable for putting their employees in danger by providing a sweeping 5-year liability shield geared to protecting businesses from coronavirus-related lawsuits, a top priority of the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The GOP plan also includes billions of dollars in funds that are completely unrelated to fighting the coronavirus pandemic, such as $686 million for F-35 fighter jets and $1.75 billion for construction of a new FBI headquarters right down the street from Trump's hotel, as we learned from Dave. Senator McConnell apparently had no idea funding for the FBI building was included in the final legislation, which was crafted in his office. I'm not sure that it is. Is it? McConnell said during a press conference when asked why the FBI funds are in the bill. Lisa Gilbert, who's executive vice president of Public Citizen, said late Monday that Mitch McConnell's proposal, negotiated without any input from Democrats in the U.S. House or Senate, is dead on arrival. And she said, quote, Senate Republicans have wasted months coming up with a proposal that remarkably would make the pandemic and economic pain even worse, especially a corporate immunity provision that would be a literal death sentence to countless Americans. It's long past time for the real negotiations to begin, unquote. On Twitter, Public Citizen denounced the GOP plan as an utter disgrace, noting that it wouldn't extend the federal eviction moratorium that expired last Friday, will provide a penny in election assistance funding for states. Titled the Health, Economic Assistance, Liability, and Schools Act, HEALS, the $1 trillion opening bid from Republicans was released in bits and pieces Monday as coronavirus cases, hospitalizations, and deaths continue to surge across the United States, and the economy remains in deep recession with the official unemployment rate hovering above 11%. Wait until this Thursday, though, only 2 days away now. The unemployment rate, I believe, is likely to be much higher once again. The Republican plan would temporarily reduce the weekly unemployment insurance boost from $600 to $200 until states can implement the complicated, some say unworkable, new system that would pay laid-off workers 70% of what they earned prior to losing their jobs. Additionally, the GOP proposal would provide another round of $1,200 direct stimulus payment to most Americans, funding for U.S. schools that meet the minimum opening requirements, and $16 billion for coronavirus testing. Tucked inside the Republican stimulus package is, as we said before, the Trust Act. Social Security Work says, if Romney really cared about strengthening Social Security, he'd support at Representative John Larson's Social Security 2100 Act. That bill would require wealthy people like Romney to pay their fair share, so he wants to use the Trust Act to cut benefits behind closed doors instead. And Nancy Ogmanovich says, happening now, at Mitt Romney on floor outlining Trust Act requiring work to prevent insolvencies of Social Security and Medicare. Romney said House Senate rescue committees would have to develop the legislation to save programs. He says Social Security due to be insolvent in 2031. No such thing is true, of course, because Social Security payments depend on appropriations by Congress. They do not depend on how much money is in the trust fund. When I say that, I know what I'm talking about. Current law does say, it does say that if the trust fund falls to zero, that you cannot pay Social Security benefits. But if, knowing this, Congress were to appropriate Social Security benefits for the year when Social Security is due to be insolvent, then such an act would be a repeal of the clause that Social Security cannot be paid. The reason why is because congressional appropriation is the real funding. It's the real funding. The trust fund doesn't do any funding because there's no money in the trust fund. When an appropriation is passed by Congress, though, that's a mandate to the executive branch to spend the appropriation. If the Social Security appropriation is made for the year 2031, it would be up to the Treasury to find the money to spend that appropriation. And the Treasury has all the power it needs to find that particular money. And if Congress thinks it doesn't, Congress can always mandate the Fed to place the money voted in the appropriation directly into the Treasury spending account. I have the legislative language necessary for that last move if anybody wants to find out what it is. It's been around since 2018. In a joint statement late Monday, the American Federation of Teachers, CARE in Action, Community Change Action, Greenpeace, and Move On warned that if passed, the Republican proposal would devastate America. Quote, no, should be outraged at Senate Republicans and the Trump administration for wasting months and at the 11th hour offering a proposal so weak that it would only guarantee our country's backslide into the COVID-19 crisis, the group said, unquote. The plan put forth by Majority Leader McConnell and Senate Republicans is a non-starter that will do nothing for workers and families and keep the United States on this devastating path, unquote. Anna Maria Archila, the co-executive director of the Center for Popular Democracy Action, slammed the GOP for, quote, coming to the table with a package that prioritizes protecting corporations from lawsuits. Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer and all congressional Democrats must reject this plan outright and fight for a package that meets the scale of the crisis, Archila said. And she urged the Democrats to fight to extend the $600 per week unemployment insurance boost, pass a paycheck guarantee, that's the Jay Powell bill, providing adequate hazard pay and PPE for frontline workers, and ensure that COVID-19 testing and treatment is free for everyone in the United States. Quote, anything less, warned Archila, quote again, will only prolong the health and economic crisis and exacerbate suffering in every corner of this country. So some healthy negative reactions to this bill. I haven't seen a positive reaction yet, except, of course, on the part of Republicans in Congress. But that's it. And the Progressive Caucus demands, and this is another article by Jake Johnson, demands Democrats reject the GOP plan to, quote, unleash widespread suffering on the American people. Hundreds of unemployed Kentucky residents wait in long lines outside the Kentucky Career Center for help with their unemployment claims on June 19, 2020 in Frankfort, Kentucky. That's from a photo that was in that article by Jake Johnson. And the leaders of the Congressional Progressive Caucus on Tuesday condemned the Senate GOP's new coronavirus stimulus proposal as a, quote, policy of mass evictions, mass homelessness, mass poverty, and mass hunger that Democrats must unequivocally reject in favor of increased protections for frontline workers and the unemployed. Quote, there are millions of Americans are on the brink of complete economic devastation as COVID-19 cases and joblessness claims continue to rise. And yet the Republican response is to dramatically hollow out unemployment and housing protections in the midst of a pandemic. And the representatives, Pramila Jayapal and Mark Pocan, co-chairs of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, said in a statement. And quote again, for more than 30 million unemployed Americans, the Republican proposal would amount to $400 less in critical relief every week, as many families are already stretching resources to put food on the table, pay the bills, and make ends meet. Jayapal and Pocan added, quote, all the while, big corporations would be shielded from any responsibility or liability for endangering the well-being of the public. CPC leaders are urging Democrats in Congress to counter the GOP's business-friendly opening offer by demanding an extension of the $600 per week boost in unemployment benefits, a moratorium on utility shutoffs, and strong housing protections to prevent a wave of evictions. Last Friday, as Common Dreams reported, an eviction moratorium covering those who live in homes with whose mortgages are federally backed expired, leaving more than 12 million people at risk of being forced onto the streets. Quote, we should also ensure that this latest bill does not become a free-for-all for corporations looking for bailouts, handouts, and liability shields, and also prevent profiteering off the virus and people's pain, said Jayapal and Pocan, referring to the GOP's proposal to protect the businesses from coronavirus-related lawsuits for 5 years. Quote, instead of shielding corporations, we should be ensuring that all essential workers are protected and states have access to increased PPE and testing supplies, Jayapal and Pocan said. Quote again, the American people can't afford half measures. We must do better for the millions of families who are counting on us, unquote. And the Progressive Caucus as a whole tweeted, the Republican proposal is nothing less than a policy of mass evictions, mass homelessness, mass poverty, and mass hunger that would unleash widespread suffering unlike anything ever experienced in America since the Great Depression. And Vox said, currently, unemployment insurance recipients are receiving an extra $600 a week on top of their standard benefits. Republicans want to cut to $200 through September. The CPC statement came shortly after House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer suggested in a CNN interview Tuesday that the GOP's proposed reduction of the $600 per week federal boost in unemployment benefits would not be a deal breaker for Democratic negotiators. Now, that is true idiocy. Hoyer went on, quote, look, it's not 600 or bust. But Pelosi said the other day, which I thought was a great line, quote, we don't have red lines. We have values. We're going into these negotiations with values. All I got to say, Nancy, is your value better be at least $600 a week. If not, you'll be taking money away from people, not the Republicans. They will see you as taking money away from them, as agreeing to have money taken away from them. Because right now, their values are getting the extra $600 a week or more during this crippling pandemic. After his remarks kicked up immediate backlash from the progressives, Hoyer tweeted that, quote, we do not have red lines, we have values, and we're going to negotiate our values, unquote. All I have to say to Steny, the schmuck, is if you take, that's why you never win any negotiations. That's why the Republicans always get most of what they want. That's why they come out of the negotiations saying, oh, we're happy, we got 90% of what we wanted. That's what happened with the fiscal cliff. If you want to negotiate, you got to have red lines. You got to be able to walk away from the table. If you're not willing to walk away from the table, Steny boy, you lose. Quote, Dems passed the HEROES Act and extended the additional $600 per week. That is our position. I hope Republicans will join us in providing that instead of telling Americans you're on your own. You idiot, they'll never join you unless you tell them it's $600 a week or there's no deal. No deal. We're not dealing on $600 per week. That's it. $600 per week for the duration of the crisis. That's what it's going to be. For the duration of the crisis, not even till the end of the year, for the duration of the crisis. Jeet Heer of a Nation said, preemptive surrender is a Democratic Party specialty. That's because Steny Hoyer has been the majority leader of the Democrats for ages, and Nancy Pelosi has been the speaker or the party leader for ages in the House. That's why it's a Democratic Party specialty. House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer says Democrats are willing to agree to a new coronavirus stimulus package that doesn't include an extension of an extra $600 in weekly unemployment benefits, saying the party's position is not 600 or bust. If you want to get anything good, it better be 600 or bust, Steny boy. A progressive congressional candidate, Alex Morse, who is challenging Representative Richard Neal, that's Richie Neal, in Massachusetts' September 1st Democratic primary, was among those criticizing Hoyer's suggestion that Democrats would be willing to cut a deal with the GOP on unemployment benefits. This isn't this isn't 600 or bust. This is food on the table or bust. This is rent or bust. Morse tweeted, I like Alex Morse. I want him to beat Richie Neal. Quote, let's not compromise for scraps and call it a win. This is a fight for our lives, and we need Democrats to hold the line, unquote. We do, folks. We surely do need them to hold the line. If they want to win and they want to sweep, they got to get people out. And if they don't hold the line, they won't get people out. And more reactions. This one is by Owen Higgins from Common Dreams. Quote, voters will know who to blame, unquote. Poll shows at least 7 in 10 Americans support $1 trillion state and local aid that the GOP refuses to provide. And there's Mitch. He talks to reporters after attending the weekly Senate Republicans policy luncheon at the U.S. Capitol, January 7th, 2020. Okay. The article says Americans across the political spectrum overwhelmingly want the federal government to provide $1 trillion for state and local aid in the next COVID-19 relief package, according to new polling, raising the stakes even higher for congressional lawmakers as they work on reconciling House and Senate bills. The poll, which was conducted by Public Policy Polling, consists of 7 separate surveys of voters in Alaska, Colorado, Georgia, Iowa, Maine, Montana, and North Carolina, and was commissioned by the American Federation of State, County, and State, County, Municipal Employees, AFSCME, Ask Me. I always think of it as Ask Me, but it's Ask Me. Quote, if senators don't do the right thing and services are cut when our communities need them most, in November, voters will know who to blame. said President Lee Saunders, the president of Asks Me, said in the statement. States are in a perilous position as the economic crisis sparked by the pandemic threatens to destroy local budgets due to precipitous declines in tax revenue. And there's a tweet. The tweet basically says states are in dire straits because they're getting no money from the federal government, and COVID-19 state budget shortfalls could be the largest on record. They will be the largest on record. They're sure to be the largest on record. These are estimates based on CBPP calculations, but that's the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities. But CBP is certainly undercounting. Their models are not so good for this. They were surprised by what happened in the period 2009 to 2013. And if COVID-19 continues this way, they're going to be surprised again. They have the 2020 shortfalls at only $110 billion. I don't think so, folks. I don't think so. In fiscal 2021, by the way, starts at the end of September. We got only 2 months left. Economic Policy Institute President Thea Lee, in a statement, excoriated Senate Republicans for the insufficient state and local aid included in the HEALS Act. Quote, the bill's failure to provide any aid to state and local governments is a glaring weakness, said Lee. And quote again, this will mean a drastic cuts to essential services like healthcare, education, public safety, right when people need them the most. Sorry, I was adjusting the mic again. I discovered that it had shifted back to the speaker system. It will cost 5.3 million jobs in both the public and private sectors by the end of 2021, as public sector cuts and layoffs cause major fallout in the private sector as well. Ask Me says 7 in 10 voters polled by PPP approve of an increase in local and state aid for the next package, quote, to prevent cuts to public services such as healthcare, education, and emergency response as cash-strapped states and localities face deep budget shortfalls due to the pandemic. In his statement, Lee Saunders noted that the decision by Senator McConnell to stall on relief efforts, despite the fact that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi sent the HEROES Act to the upper chamber in May. And, quote, Speaker Pelosi and the U.S. House passed this aid as well as unemployment insurance a week ago as part of the HEROES Act, said Saunders. And, quote again, meanwhile, Senator McConnell decided to hit pause and go on vacation, which is exactly what he did. So he could have a good time feeding his face at home. He decided to hit pause. Of course, what he was really doing was putting the squeeze on the Democrats and Nancy Pelosi so that he could put forward this bullshit bill in hopes that the Democrats would fold because people need immediate money, however little. Now, let's hope that this time, unlike countless other times, the speaker shows a little backbone. Quote, now, as a surge of the virus continues across the country, Senators can no longer ignore the calls of voters, local officials, and economists who have repeatedly called for this relief. Saunders continued. The Senate must not leave Washington until this aid is delivered so that we can beat the pandemic and safely reopen the economy. Here is what Nancy Pelosi needs to do. Here is what she needs to do. She needs to get the House right now to pass a revised version of the HEROES Act containing a clause that rolls back the clock to last Friday. Okay, and that says to people that all evictions will be reversed when this bill passes, and that if people are evicted from their homes, that they will be able to sue their landlords for compensation at the time this bill passes. She needs to have that kind of clause in the bill so that voters know that if the Democrats win the House and the Senate and the presidency, and this new version of the HEROES Act is passed, that landlords who foreclose on voters now will pay the price at the start of next year, that they will be liable for compensation. I know a law like this might be questionable, considered as an ex post facto law. If that's the case, then it remains to be adjudicated by the courts. But nevertheless, such a statement by Nancy Pelosi would have to be reckoned with as a state of intention to compensate the people damaged by the Republicans and damaged by the landlords, but damaged especially by the Republicans due to their failure to pass the HEROES Act on time. People have to know that Democrats will, if they win the House and they win the Senate and they win the presidency, that they will go out of their way to compensate people who have suffered due to the Republicans' failure to protect them during this coronavirus. That is something that Nancy Pelosi needs to do, because everybody knows the odds right now are in favor of a Democratic sweep. The Democrats can only increase the odds of such a sweep if they come out with such a bill and they pass it in the House right now. Now, that is a new idea. It's a tough idea, but it's one that should be implemented by this Speaker of the House, who seems to revel in compromise and then say, well, I got something. We don't need something at this point. We need solutions to stop people from getting hurt. And that means going to the brink on this and beyond Speaker Pelosi. That's what it means. So those are the reactions. I'm now going to move to a scenario involving Donald J. Trump. Okay, this appeared in The Guardian. I thought it was worth considering. By the way, I should be sharing my screen tonight so you can see these particular articles, but there's still a technical difficulty. I've now traced it to StreamYard. StreamYard introduced a green screen feature, and I don't know exactly how to turn it off yet. But what generally has been happening, I thought I solved the problem last night after the show, but I still got it for this show. But basically, I can show you basically what happens if it's going to happen again. If it doesn't happen again, I'll be able to share the article with you, but let's check it out. Okay. Okay, so my system says I'm sharing this tab to StreamYard.com. But all I'm getting on StreamYard, all that I'm getting is a big green background. I can see myself in the share, but I cannot see the article. I cannot see the article. Okay, I wonder if you can see it, or whether you're just seeing a big green patch on the screen. Honey, are you seeing a big green patch on the screen right now? Okay, I'm not getting an answer from Bonnie, so she must not be hearing me. So you can't see a big green catch? A little bit of green in the lower right-hand corner? Okay, so are you seeing the article I'm trying to share?
Yes, I can see the big green, but I also see that small patch.
Okay, I don't see.
And a large green.
Okay, thanks. I'm also getting.
No,
Huh?
no.
Okay, no what?
I do not see I don't see any article. I'm seeing a big piece of green.
Okay. Okay, so that's what happens. So that's what happens. So that's because of the new revision of the software. So I'm just going to have to go. I'm just going to have to talk my way through the article. Okay, I cannot show it to you this time, unfortunately. So it was written by Lawrence Douglas. It says, "What if Trump loses but refuses to leave office?" And he says, here's the worst case scenario. While working on a book about the peaceful succession of power, I came to realize that built into our system of presidential elections is a Chernobyl-like defect. Placed under the right conditions of stress, the system is vulnerable to catastrophic breakdown. Yes, we know. The risk of such an electoral meltdown ordinarily is rather small, but this November promises, in a manner last seen in 1876, to present a combination of stressors that could lead to epic failure. The problem begins but does not end with Donald Trump, who in his recent interview with Chris Wallace once again reminded the nation that losing is not an option. He will reject any election that results in his loss, claiming it to be rigged. Even though this is alarming, Trump alone cannot crash the system. Instead, an unusual constellation of forces, the need to rely heavily on mail-in ballots because of the pandemic, the political divisions in the key swing states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, and a hyperpolarized Congress all work together to turn Trump's defiance into a crisis of historic proportions. Consider the following scenario. It's the 3rd of November, 2020, Election Day. It's also Guy Fawkes Day, isn't it? 3rd of November is Guy Fawkes Day. Remember the 3rd of November? Isn't that so, folks? Yeah, well, that's interesting. I don't know why that's there. Yeah. I have no idea why that's there. Okay, thanks, honey. Okay. By midnight, it's clear that former Vice President Joe Biden enjoys a substantial lead in the national popular vote, but the Electoral College vote remains tight. With the races in 47 states and the District of Columbia called, Biden leads Trump in the Electoral College vote 252 to 240, but neither candidate has secured the 270 votes that are necessary for victory. All eyes remain on Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania and their 46 Electoral College votes. So that's the premise of that particular situation. I don't know if that premise makes a lot of sense, but that's what Lawrence Douglas thinks. In each of these 3 states, Trump enjoys a slim lead, but the election day returns do not include a huge number of mail-in ballots. Now, of course, the assumption in back of this is that the people who go to the vote, who go to the polls to vote on the same day, are going to be Trump's people, because the opposition to Trump is not intense enough to have a lot of people actually go to the polls on election day from the Democratic side or from the anti-Trump side. I don't know whether this assumption is reasonable or warranted. It doesn't seem very reasonable to me, because given what's been happening now with Trump sending federal troops into Democratic cities, lots and lots of people are going to want to go to the polls on election day. Of course, the troops won't be controlling the election. There won't be enough of them to control the elections in the various areas. If they try to control the elections, what's likely to happen is the military is going to intervene. I don't think the military is going to stand for that. But anyway, I think there are going to be lots of barriers in the way of Trump keeping those troops there, for election time. Some states, such as Colorado, have been counting their mail-in votes from the day they arrive, but not Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. These states do not allow election officials to begin the task of counting the mail-ins until election day itself. It will take days, even weeks, for the key swing states to finish their count. The election hangs in the balance, only not for Trump. Based on his 3rd of November leads, Trump has already declared himself reelected. His reliable megaphones and the right-wing media repeat and amplify his declaration and urge Biden to concede. Biden says he will do no such thing. Biden knows the bulk of the mail-in ballots have been cast in heavily populated urban areas where voters were unwilling to expose themselves to the health risks of in-person voting. And he is keenly aware that urban voters vote overwhelmingly Democratic. Indeed, this phenomenon, in which mail-in and provisional ballots typically break Democratic, has been dubbed blue shift by election law experts. Well, here's another problem, okay, with this particular scenario. Urban voters are the ones taking the greatest risks, health risks, okay, of in-person voting. And they will also be the ones whose friends and family have disproportionately died due to the greater density of population of urban areas and the socially induced spread of COVID virus. With 3 and a fraction more months to go until the voting, and with the average of fatalities being roughly now 30,000 per month, with 120,000 people still due to die, most of them in the urban areas of the United States. We are going to have all manner of friends and family and acquaintances of those who died wanting to revenge themselves on Trump. And they will take health risks to do that. They're already taking health risks to demonstrate en masse in the big cities. They try to social distance, they wear masks, but they're out there demonstrating for nights on end. Do you think that they won't hate Donald Trump so much by then that they won't go to the polls? I mean, Trump is developing a reservoir of hate among those who might be less enthusiastic or less than enthusiastic about Joe Biden. The things he's doing are playing into the hands of the centrists on the Democratic side, who otherwise would not have intensity going for them. The worse the Republicans do in stimulating the economy and keeping it strong, and the worse they do with respect to the coronavirus, the more intense the voters who want to get rid of Trump and get rid of the Republicans become. And the more likely it is that they will take the risk to their health necessary to go and vote. So that's what I think. I think the voters on election day on the anti-Trump side are going to be at least as intense as the voters on election day on the Trump side. So, I'm not at all sure about this blue ship. It seems to me the blue advantage on election day is going to be as it's going to be in the mail-in voting. The point of view that says this is not true okay, is the point of view of suburbanites who will take care to cast mail-in ballots. It betrays the middle-class orientation of the author. The count of the mail-in ballots in the 3 swing states is plagued by delays, he says. Overworked election officials, slowed by the need to maintain social distance, struggle to process the huge volume of votes. Trump's lawyers, aided by the Department of Justice, bring multiple suits insisting that tens of thousands of votes must be tossed out for having failed to arrive by the date specified by the statute. All the same, as the count creeps forward, a clear pattern emerges. Trump's lead is shrinking. This again assumes that on election day, Trump's going to have a lead. I don't believe that's going to be the case. I think Biden's going to have a lead on election day. And then vanishes altogether. By the time the 3 states complete their canvass of votes nearly a month after the election, the nation faces an astonishing result. Biden now leads in all 3. It appears he has been elected our next president. Now, this assumes, okay, the election will come down to the last 3, but the polling at present doesn't in any way show that. I mean, what are the underlying assumptions here that would cause the polls to move over the last months? Well, Nate Silver says, I don't always agree with Nate Silver, but he may be right here. He says one thing is that the coronavirus situation has to get better. But I think there's another thing too, and that is that the economy has to get better. If the coronavirus situation gets better, it's only going to be because people are continuing to stay home and states are managing things in such a way that the contagion is limited by social distancing and by wearing masks. And the minute that stops, the contagion is going to emerge again, because in the coming 3 months, August, September, October, there won't be any vaccine tested and mass produced sufficiently to give to people during this time. At most, the vaccine will be a promise for the future, even if things look good for the vaccine. At the time of election day, there will still be 240,000 deaths due to COVID-19, most of which can be blamed on Trump by people like me, who will point out the performance of places like Korea, Taiwan, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, South Korea, even China. There are nations that will have handled this with a fraction of the deaths per million that we will have had in this country. Bonnie says, I'm having trouble with my video. Am I having trouble with my video? Steve, I think it's going to be 240,000 dead, okay, by my count, because we're running about 30,000 a month now in fatalities. We're going about 1,000 a day. And it's still on the rise in terms of fatalities. We haven't hit the peak of fatalities yet. But I'll get into your comments, okay, in a while. So, by November, I don't see the polls moving much because the Republicans are insisting on doing nothing for the economy, but basically selling it short. And it seems to me the Republicans are also not moving aggressively on the coronavirus yet. In state after state after state, they're still not moving aggressively. There's still denial. They still can't cross the big river. They still can't get over to the other side. They're deep into that big river still. You still see the nutcases on Facebook. You still see the crud. When it comes down to election day, those 3 states won't be left. Trump is a dead duck in Michigan right now. He's certainly a dead duck in Pennsylvania, by even more right now. And he doesn't look good in Wisconsin either. And the Democrats look good in a number of other states that Trump won, like Arizona, even Texas. Trump is going to lose Montana. This is going to be an old-timey election. It's going to be the kind of sweep we haven't seen since Ronald Reagan. That's the way it looks to me right now. So Lawrence Douglas is giving us a scenario which doesn't seem at all a likely scenario to me right now. But let's go on with it. So Trump claims that the radical Democrats are trying to steal his victory. The mail-in ballots are infected with fraud. Oh, and by the way, today it was mentioned during the Judiciary Committee hearings with Barr. An article was placed in the Record showing that in states that have mail-in ballots right now, empirical studies were done showing that the amount of election fraud in those mail ballots was at the level of, I believe, 0.0007 was quoted in that article. That figure is going to be spread around and propagandized. His media has great power to propagandize, but remember, the rest of the mainstream media is against him now, fully against him. And Biden has plenty of money, and that figure is going to be spread all over the country. Now, Trump's people aren't going to believe that. They're still going to believe Trump. But the overwhelming majority of the American people will believe the mail-in vote. Now things take an ominous turn. Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania all shared the same political profile. All 3 states are controlled by Republican legislatures faithful to Trump. And so Republican lawmakers in Lansing, Madison, and Harrisburg take up the fight to declare Trump victorious in their state, citing irregularities and unconscionable delays in the counting of the mail-in ballots. State Republicans award Trump their state's electoral college votes. Yet all 3 of our crucial swing states also have Democratic governors. Outraged by the actions of Republican lawmakers, the Democratic governors of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania announced they will recognize Biden as having carried their state. They certify Biden as the winner and send the certificate cast by his electors on to Congress. It's now the 6th of January, 2021, the day on which the joint session of Congress opens the state electoral certificates and officially tallies the votes. Normally, this is a ceremonial function, but not today. Suddenly, Congress is confronted with the astonishing reality that Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania have each submitted conflicting electoral certificates, one awarding its electoral college votes to Trump, the other to Biden. The election hangs in the balance. Seems far-fetched, yet this nation faced a nearly identical crisis in the notorious Hayes-Tilden election of 1876, when 3 separate states submitted conflicting electoral certificates, with neither Hayes nor Tilden enjoying an electoral college majority. A divided Congress, a Democratic House, and a Republican Senate fought bitterly over which certificates to recognize. Congress tried to resolve things by handling the problem to a one-off special electoral commission, but partisan rancor played the work of that body too. Inauguration Day neared, and the nation had no president-elect. Or rather, it had 2 rivals, both claiming victory. President Ulysses S. Grant, Wade declaring martial law. Catastrophe was avoided only by a last-second disastrous compromise between the parties. Republicans agreed to remove federal troops from the South, paving the way for Jim Crow, and in return, Samuel Tilden, the Democrats' candidate, conceded. Chastened by that experience, Congress passed a law, the Electoral Count Act of 1887, meant to guide Congress should a state ever again submit more than one electoral certificate. Since its passage, the provisions of the ECA have been triggered only once. That was back in 1969, and the issue was trivial, with no bearing on Nixon's victory. In January 2021, the nation finds itself a true electoral crisis, and lawmakers quickly realize that the 1887 law is glaringly deficient, failing to anticipate the most destabilizing contingencies. And so Congress descends into acrimonious debate, with each side charging the other with attempting to steal the election. The chambers vote on which certificates to accept. The outcome foreordained. The Senate, which after the 2020 vote remains in Republican control, rejects the governor's certificate and accepts the certificates from the legislature, and the democratically controlled House votes in precisely the opposite fashion. Stalemate. Both parties appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, but the court, in sharp contrast to its intervention in 2000 in Bush v. Gore, proves unable to solve the crisis. Experts insist that the court has no role to play in resolving an election dispute once it reaches Congress, a view that finds support in the ECA itself, with lawmakers in both parties saying that they would not abide by an unfavorable holding. The court chooses not to intervene. Congress remains deadlocked, with neither party prepared to concede. As protests roil the country, Trump invokes the Insurrection Act, deploying the military to protect his victory. The nation finds itself in a full-blown crisis of succession from which there is no clear, peaceful exit. So let me comment, at this point. This assumes that in September, the Senate will still be Republican. That is not the way things look But right now, even a relatively conservative reading of the electoral situation right now in various states seems to indicate that Democrats will emerge with a margin of 51 to 49 in the Senate. So the party lines in the two houses will not be divided. So that's another unlikely assumption he's making, okay, that the Republicans and Mitch McConnell will still retain control of the Senate. They may not retain control of the Senate. Some of the states that I've seen in awarded to the Republican candidates by forecasters, okay, are unlikely to go to those Republican candidates. For example, the state, okay, of Arizona, I don't see that going to a Republican senatorial candidate right now. It looks like it's very clear for Kelly, okay, for Mark Kelly to win in Arizona. In South Carolina, it may be Lindsey Graham is going to pull it out, but he's getting, okay, a very tough run. Tom Tillis, okay, in North Carolina, looks very weak at this point. Cory Gardner in Colorado looks like he's gone. If Steve Daines wins, okay, in the Montana election, I'd be very, very surprised, okay, because Bullock is very strong in his state. He is very strong, and he is holding at this point a small lead. I think it will only get stronger. Only get stronger. Now, Doug Jones in Alabama looks like he's going to lose. But it looks like the Democrats will make it up in many other states. Susan Collins looks like a goner at this point. I think Sarah Gideon has a 6-point lead. And what can refurbish the reputation of Susan Collins, Kay, at this point? Kavanaugh has been a disaster, refuting all her assumptions about actually voting for him. And Sarah Gideon is young. She's vigorous. Collins looks like she's falling apart. And Maine is like a 50-50 state. And the whole nation will be trending towards Gore. I don't think the Republican Party gets the Senate. Okay, but let's say they do. Let us say they do. Why should Mitch McConnell vote for Trump? Why would he not prefer Joe Biden as the president? As long as he's the majority leader of the Senate. He still gets to have a great influence on judicial appointments, and he gets to block the Democratic initiatives again, and probably is in a position to get the House for the Republicans again in 2022 and delay the whole progressive movement. Why would he want Trump as president, pulling him and the Republican Party down? He doesn't need that. He probably figures Biden would be a feckless president, or at least a relatively weak one. And if Nancy Pelosi came back as Speaker, he knows he can pretty much outmaneuver her all the time. It will be even easier if Trump isn't around. Why would he want to vote for Trump? He could vote for Biden, still have a corporatist in there, still have a neoliberal in there. Why wouldn't he want that? Why would the Republicans want the albatross of Donald Trump around their neck? Why would they want a president who threatens them at every turn with a primary if they don't do exactly what he says? Why would the GOP senators want to live with that anymore? Why wouldn't Ted Cruz want to get Trump out of the way? Why wouldn't Marco Rubio? Why would not Marco Rubio want to stick the knife in Trump's ribs if he had the chance? What do they get out of Trump's continuing in the presidency? Why wouldn't they just want to restore the establishment? I mean, they can't have a Bush-like figure in the presidency, but the closest thing to a Bush-like figure as president is Joe Biden, not Donald Trump. Not Donald Trump. So that's the end. I don't think that this argument is correct. It's low probability in its essentials. But simply apart from that, even if it came down to the vote of the House, okay, and of the Senate on disagreements over certificates, I think both houses are going to accept the certifications of the governor rather than the certifications of the legislature. Because both houses stand to gain if Trump loses to Joe Biden. Now, maybe the outcome would be different if it was a close race with Bernie Sanders. But I don't think it would be a close race with Bernie Sanders at all. Now, there's the assumption that it will be a close race assumes Joe Biden, okay, is the nominee, which does appear to be the case. But the other problem is that if Joe Biden is the nominee, the Republicans in the Senate might well prefer Joe Biden as president to Donald Trump as president. So it seems to me, even in this low probability situation, there is a clear exit that in the short run would be peaceful. In the longer run, of course, it would be ruinous. It would be especially ruinous, it seems to me, relative to the climate crisis. It would be ruinous to Medicare for all. It would be ruinous for solving the inequality problem. It would be ruinous for getting our democracy back. But we would at least get rid of the fascist. And Douglas finishes up and he says, electoral Armageddon can be avoided. Should Trump lose decisively, not only in the popular vote, but in the Electoral College too, his capacity to engage in constitutional brinksmanship will be limited. This is not to say that he won't claim the election was rigged, only that his claim will probably not trigger a larger constitutional crisis. But should Trump's defeat turn on the count of mail-in ballots in our crucial swing states, prepare for chaos. Our nation could witness dark times. Okay, I place the likelihood of this happening at this point in time Of course, I may change my view as we go forward, but right now, I think the likelihood of this is very small. I'd say less than 1%. I'm not talking the probability of it, I'm talking the likelihood of it. There's a difference between likelihood and probability. I think the likelihood is somewhere less than 1%. In the present situation, given all of our circumstances, it might be less than 1/100th. Okay, of 1%. So I think, okay, if we get to the election, and if the election happens, okay, and if the votes are counted, then I think that Trump is a goner. And what we have to pay attention to is the possibility that we won't even get to the election. The reason being because of the in the streets fascist strategy and tactics that Trump is pursuing right now. That is dangerous and increasingly dangerous. And if the Republicans really don't want to deal with Trump anymore, then what they really need to do, I think, is to have a conference with Nancy Pelosi, impeach him now, and let Pence finish out his term. Okay, onward to the comments. Onward to the comments. Let me check my sound again and see that it hasn't switched. God, this is awful. Keep switching back to system sound, and I don't know how to stop that. But I will learn. Okay, so your comments now. Your comments. Carmen says, I think it's needless austerity to force people into shit-paying jobs so workers will die in the face of COVID for minimal profits. Yes, it's stupid. People will hate the Republican Party for generations if they do this. The millions will be homeless too, says Kay. Shake my head. I hope they all riot at the Capitol building. Steve says, nice shirt, Doc. Thank you, Steve. Steve says, I'm thinking maybe going vagabond, motorhome, camp out in the desert near Area 51 to look for aliens. And Carmen says, I bet you'll find them in a jiffy. Watch out for that probe. Steve Gonzo says, Emmanuel, a pediatrician and religious minister, has a history of making bizarre claims on medical topics and other issues. She's often claimed that gynecological problems like cysts and endometriosis are in fact caused by having people having sex in their dreams with demons and witches. She alleges alien DNA is currently used in medical treatments and that scientists are cooking up a vaccine to prevent people from being religious, and despite appearing in Washington, D.C. to lobby Congress. Yes, I received from a relative a video, a totally crazy, off-the-wall video that was evidently inspired by some of her claims. And Carmen said, did anyone watch the barf test today? I don't have TV. I watched a part of it, okay, on YouTube. The most satisfying moment was when Jayapal went after Barr. She really did good. Steve says, makes sense to me. I've had sex with witches. Carmen says, okay, thanks. Of course, Herr Fuhrer and the rest aren't going to give states any money. They're forcing governors to force workers to work and kids to catch COVID in schools and then spread the COVID to their parents so their parents die. Kay says, I hope the Dems don't approve that one, especially the part about the screwing up Social Security, Medicare, okay, and Medicaid. Well, with even the slightest bit of luck at all, by the time they get to screwing up Social Security, Medicare, okay, and Medicaid, a sufficient amount of the country will have accepted MMT, such that they will know that it is all nonsense. And Congress will go right on with congressional appropriations for Social Security that are much more generous than those we have now. And Carmen says the 1,200 isn't set in stone yet. I think the 1,200 is pretty set in stone because that was the figure offered by Pelosi, and the Republicans are offering that too. So Pelosi's way of dealing with things is saying, well, the Republicans and us ought to sit down and see where there is common ground in these bills. So common ground is the $1,200 one-time payment. So that at least that seems to be set in stone. Now I could see Pelosi maybe saying something. Look, if you want to cut the unemployment insurance by $400 a week, you have to give something back. You have to give something back. So this can't be $1,200. There has to be 3 rounds of $1,200. 3 rounds. 1 round right now, a second round next month, and the third round of the month after that. And if you know what's good for you in the upcoming election, you better do that. That will make up for the money the unemployed have lost from you cutting unemployment insurance down by that much. And it may even provide enough of a stimulus that the economy won't suffer any more than it's suffering now. Though God, if it suffers as much as it's suffering now, I mean, there are between 30 and 40 million unemployed people. I don't see how the Republicans can get through that. That number of unemployed plus 240,000 deaths, that attributable to Republican governance in the Senate, in the presidency, and in the judiciary? Oh, wow. Not sure, Carmen, says Kay. And Carmen says, Evelina Pont, Evelina, what's your favorite moniker for the Tangerine Tyrant? Steve DeVore says Congress needs to be replaced. Steve Wolfbrand says, Sandy Degg, Johnny Garza, Lana Dell. The call out. And Carmen says, new FBI, fascist bastards in service of Trump. Carmen says, I'm going to need something stronger than tea for this. Kay says, anytime the GOP comes up with anything called trust, do not trust any of it. Carmen says, trust me, I don't. Democrats either. Steve says, yeah, those probes are bad. Don't drop the soap. Jesus. Steve says, does anyone trust Congress any longer? I don't. Kay says, me neither. Steve DeVore. Evelina says, I think you gave it to me, laugh out loud. And Dolores says, hi, and smiles. Carmen says, dropping the soap wouldn't be an issue for me if I were in jail. Carmen says, awesome sauce. Evelina says, still holding out for the progressives in the party. Carmen says, you'd be a damn fool. Fingers crossed, Evelina Font. Steve says, soap on a rope. Steve DeVore says, they used to write laws to protect people. When was the last time that happened? Now they watch everything we do or are trying to. Kay says, I agree. Steve DeVore. Carmen says, no, they don't have those in there either. Stephen DeVore says, free country my ass. Kay says, haven't been free for many decades now. Carmen says, anyone ever snacked on unsweetened applesauce with granola mixed in? Got both from the food bank. No, I haven't actually done that, but I suspect it won't be too bad. And Carmen says, hell, Capitol Hill will tell the public that the crisis is over. Yeah, but the public isn't going to believe it because the public will know when the crisis is over, when friends and family stop dying and people they've heard about stop dying, and also when everybody can go back to work without catching COVID. Kay says, I'm beginning to wonder if this damn crisis will ever be over. Carmen says, not for at least 5 years. Kay says, I don't think I can deal with it that long. Carmen says, you have a choice. Not at this point. Give me a euthanasia option. Kay says, eternal peace sounds real good right now. If I get any sicker, Carmen says, I'll have to see if New Jersey still has it. Evelina says, climate crisis on the heel of the corona and economic crisis. Christ. I don't know, Carmen. Why even bother to put a time frame on it? Carmen says, because I'm not suicidal, just hate suffering. Kay says, there was an old sci-fi movie about a euthanasia option many years ago. Can't remember the name of it right now. Soylent Green. Soylent Green had a euthanasia option, which was taken by Edward G. Robinson's character shortly before Robinson died. In the final scene, they're playing Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, the Pastoral Symphony, for Robinson. And I'm sorry, that's not quite the final scene, but in one of the last scenes of the movie, and they're showing a very nice video while he sinks into a peaceful state. Kay says, I'm not suicidal either. I just suffer in different ways than you. Steve DeVore says, nope. But I've gotten food bank food I wouldn't give to a dog. The peanut butter I got from there, I think, was World War II surplus. KY, you a strong sister. Carmen says, mine. I purely physical, emotional, and trauma I resolve because reading and research, is everywhere. Kay says, not as strong as people think anymore. Lost everything I worked for my whole life since age 16, including my hubby of 20 plus years. Steve says, I'm back. Damn boss keeps calling. I think he's lonely. Steve says, you got us, Kay. Their punt butter F's me up too, but other stuff is good. I'm grateful. Carmen says, been there. Kay says, I know, Steve, and that means a lot. Trust me, I can say what I want here and not be judged. You can. Carmen says, Caitlin Johnstone trashes The Guardian, but she didn't get into the specifics. Carmen says, yep, big green patch for me, Joe. I see a patch in you on the left. Yep, big green patch, no article, Joe. Green patch dead center towards right. You're on the left of it. Steve says, no article. Steve says, it's okay, Doc. Carmen says, hello, Bonnie. Nice to hear your voice. Evelina says, sound is great. Because of COVID, we may not know the results for weeks. Murky, chaotic, and nobody will know who really won. The pharmaceutical companies refused to meet with Adolf Hitler today. I guess they're pissed. Steve says, did he really lower drug costs? Not yet. He's just bluffing right now. If you vote by mail, mail it in ASAP. Kay says, need to have drop boxes at polling places so we can take it there and drop it off. One thing I know already, if my ballot says I voted for Trump, the system's been hacked. Steve says, not with a gun to my head would I vote for him. Carmen says, because voting screens will be a high risk of COVID contaminants themselves. Kay says, I'd say, shoot me, please, laugh out loud. Steve DeVore says, vote by mail. If they had the drop boxes, they could count some every day. We have some face shields now. We can wear face shields and masks. Avril says, the DNC HRC rigging in 2016 is the reason we now have this fascism in hell. One of the reasons, it's one of the reasons, but it still could have been avoided even if Trump had been elected, if the Democrats had fought harder during this period of time, and especially after they won in 2018. They should have been impeaching Trump after 1 month on the basis of violation of the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution. He immediately violated the Emoluments Clause. That's grounds for impeachment. They should have passed it at once, impeached him at once, and kept doing it until the Republicans were brought around. Steve says this election is looking like a total clusterfuck. Well, most of the primaries were a total clusterfuck. And Nico House has a video that says AOC is not your friend. And we'll take a look at that. Steve says, and the debate will be hysterical. Kay says, stock market was in the red again today. Good. And Carmen says, Corona is going to get worse because flu season starts in September. Compounding systems in hospital, ICU, overflow. And Carmen says, good. Steve says 200,000 dead by November. No, it's already over 150,000. It's like 152,000 today. I'll tell you, it's going to be 90,000 more by election day. That's 242,000. Kay says, looks fine to me. Alvaro says, no, only delay. Lana says, video is okay. Thank you, Lana. Steve says, blurry and delay here, NBD. And Steve Wolfbrand says, stock market better not crash. I got $250,000 in that shit. Kay says, how do the homeless vote? Can they vote? But maybe that is another reason why they want so many homeless. Yeah, the homeless can vote as long as they're still in their district, okay, and they have an address. They still can vote. In other words, I'm not sure whether it's entirely legal if they do not have an address, but of course they all will have a registration card which will have a true address on it. And if they're still voting in their same the voting district, they can go to the polls, and they can vote. Steve says, this all falls on one man's screw-up calling COVID-19 a hoax back in January. It was nothing but criminal, and he should answer for his crimes, of mass death. He should. And it's not just that he called it a hoax back in January, but he stuck with it. And he told us nonsense, all kinds of nonsense. Anything to make it seem as though he was in the know and he was telling us the right thing to do. Carmen says, I think that's why they're letting Rona kill seniors, because seniors vote. Well, Carmen, that really doesn't make sense because seniors voted for Trump in 2016, and they probably would have continued to do so, except that Trump has been setting up the situation so seniors incur a higher risk of dying. And now seniors have turned against him. That's why seniors have turned against him. and why a majority of seniors are going to vote against him. Quote, disturbing memo reveals Trump's USPS chief has slowed the mail deliveries amid calls to expand voting by mail. Yes, well. And Carmen says, isn't that why Donald Trump is booby trapping the post office so mail-in voting gets thwarted? It may be a part of the reason. Carmen says, when Biden announces his VP next week, we'll know right away who will win. If it's Kamala, it'll be over for them. There was an interesting interview on the Zero Hour with R.J. Esco about how the post office was screwed over for many years. You can find it on YouTube. That, okay, is very well known. The biggest aspect of getting screwed over for years has been requiring them to provide for retirement for 75 years in the future. Their losses are due to that particular provision. If they only had to provide for the retirement of current employees, like everybody else has to, they would not be underwater now. And McConnell likes the power Trump gives him, and I feel he has a little fascist bug in him too. I've never trusted him. He doesn't get that power from Trump. He gets that power because he's the majority leader of the Senate. If he continues as majority leader, he will still have that power. Biden will still have to deal with him, and Biden will deal with him on the basis of compromise. I mean, he telegraphs that kind of thing all the time. I mean, that's his idea of how to govern. That was his idea of how to deal with segregationists. Carmen says, but DT's type of fascism is bad for Wall Street. Well, it's unpredictable for Wall Street. It's like Hitler's type, okay, fascism was unpredictable for Germany. In the end, it turned out to be terrible for German business. Kay said, never could figure why Kentucky keeps voting for him or that other libertarian, I forgot his name, Rand Paul. And Steve Wolfbrand says, the election will wind up in the Supreme Court again. Well, if it winds up in Congress first, it can't wind up in the Supreme Court. Congress has to settle it. They just have to take votes and vote again and vote again and vote again and vote again until everybody gets tired and they settle it one way or another. They have to arrive at a decision, constitutionally speaking. Stephen DeVore says, I posted still Sanders, and you should have seen the shitstorm I walked into. Shake my head. Huh? I'm sorry? What was that? What'd you say when you posted? Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio like Trump's hard line on Venezuela and Cuba, though. Wouldn't Biden be softer in Latin America? He might be a little softer, but he's a hawk in foreign policy. He's a hawk in foreign policy. I don't know if he would be softer on Latin America. And I don't know, okay, if Rubio is so hardline on Cuba anymore. Underneath it all. I mean, relations were improving, but trade relations were there. L. Stephen Day says, hashtag still Sanders. Steve Wolfbrand says, nope. Damn neolibs are everywhere. Evelina says, hashtag Bernie 2020. Steve Wolfbrand says, Sanders who? I have to say that I also have bad feelings about what Bernie did. I think if Bernie had stayed in there and was still fighting, I think the proposals from the Democrats would be much better. Good night, Russ. Russ says the sound has stayed consistent on my end since you adjusted it at the beginning. And Steve Day says 600 grit. Good slogan. Evelina says, I think their constituents see it that way, though. Steve says, it's what he stands for. It doesn't have to be him. Evelina says they prefer a Republican president. Steve Wolfbrand says they don't vote. Who are they? Russ Goldman says the sound has stayed consistent on my end since you adjusted it at the beginning. Thank you, Russ. Steve Day says if we all become lobbyists for the public purpose. And Rick Maynard says, night all, thanks, take care, be safe. Night, Rick. Dolores Pierce says, good night, Richard. And Kay says, that 1,200 will keep me off Medicaid in Ohio. Laugh out loud. And Carmen says, aren't corporations like grocery stores going to suffer a great deal when they cut to 600 a week? Yeah, they probably will suffer some. Russ says, I'm clocking out. Long drives for tomorrow. Stay safe. Yeah, you stay safe too, Russ. Kay says, yes, Soylent Green. Thank you, Joe. Laugh out loud. Steve Wolfbrand, Soylent Green is people. And Kay says, I know Steve. Laugh out loud. And Carmen says, I share these dreams almost every time, invite all friends too, but unfortunately not many are tuning in. And Steve Wolfbrand says, IKR. Kay says, I do too, Carmen. Steve says, I guess Dr. Joe is an acquired taste. Carmen says, I have like over 1,800 friends. Where are they when I invite them? I don't know. I have a lot of friends too, and I always say, hey, where are they when I invite them? My daughter has 5,000 friends, and where are they when she invites them? I don't know. Carmen says, I don't like, but Nico, he's 50, he's shifty. Well, I'll tell you, Carmen, I do like Nico. Okay, I think that he really, really tries to tell the truth. I like his take on things. I don't always agree with his take on things. I sometimes think his way out. Sometimes, he adopts a bias, like with respect to Tulsi Gabbard, I think, and that he just loves her, come what may. But generally speaking, I think Nico has very good insights and knows a lot about the inside, of politics. And I like to listen to him on occasion. Carmen says, okay, I stand corrected. Thanks, Dr. J. Kay says, I keep my friends list down to below 200, says Kay. Dolores says, good night, Russ. Kay says, if I don't interact with them on a regular basis, they go. Steve says, I have 3,000, mostly leftover Bernie people. Kay says, a big part of mine are Bernie people too. Yeah, a big part of mine are Bernie people too. Steve says, springtime for Hitler, laugh out loud. Oh, well, gee. Carmen says, wow, now I don't feel so bad that my FB friends aren't checking this out. Maybe it's FB fuckery. And Carmen says, gay Hitler on Saturday Night Live. Steve Gonzo says, the audiobook is now out. Which audiobook? The audiobook for what? Is that Stephanie's audiobook? Whose audiobook is that? Is it Stephanie's? Anyway. The audiobook for Pav's audiobook on the job guarantee. Kay says, I like Nomiki Konst. She was an insider on the DNC committee. So she explains things to me that I never knew. Yes, I like her for the same reason. In fact, I watched her show dealing with a Democratic scan earlier tonight. Dolores says the audiobook is the case for the job guarantee. Yes, Pavlina's audiobook. Okay, I've come to the end. Thank you for coming. I am going to say good night. I'm going to try to fix my technical problems by getting some support from the people at StreamYard. But I have to remind myself how to get support from the people at StreamYard because it's been so long since I've gotten any. Anyway, thank you for coming, and thank you for staying, and thank you for sharing. Thank you for everything, and I'll see you tomorrow. Oh, Steve Gonzo says, I met Nico and Jeff Day posse passing through the Standing Rock. I gave them a generator as it was freezing. Wow. Steve Wolfbrand says, YouTube is offering some free movies. I just watched The Secret of Rowan Inslee. Very good. Takes your mind off politics. Yes, I've been watching some of the YouTube movies also, since I keep tuned to YouTube. Okay, Dolores says thank you and good night all. And Carmen says thank you for having us. Good night. Kay says thank you for another night of great discussion. I love you all. We love you too, Kay. Have a great night. See you tomorrow.